What does it take to be successful in politics? How does one go about getting elected? And how does one stay elected? Today we're going to find out from 3 successful politicians. Stay tuned for Careers. My name is Peter Wolfl, and welcome to Careers. My first guest today, which is about politics, is Shea. He is an executive metropolitan councillor for Ward 1. He is also an Anglican priest and a dean for Humber College. He represents the municipal level of government. Our second guest today is David Fleet, and he represents the provincial level of government. He is an MPP for High Park, Swansea. Our third guest today is Patrick Boyer, MP for Etobicoke Lakeshore. He represents the federal level of government. Welcome, gentlemen, to the show.
Peter.
Glad to be here.
Now, today's show is all about politics. What does it take to be successful as a politician? Obviously, all 3 of you are successful politicians. You've been elected, and you have a good idea of what you've gone through. You can speak from your own personal examples. I'd like to establish, if possible, what motivates people to enter politics in the first place, and at what level? Maybe we can start with you, Derwin. What motivated you, and especially why did you go into the municipal level?
Well, Peter, I go back some time in my education. My graduate degrees are in urban history, and at one point David Crombie approached me and asked if I would let my name stand for membership on the City of Toronto Planning Board. And I said yes, I'd be delighted to, and then I asked him what on earth was the City of Toronto Planning Board. Later discovered it was responsible for the official plan and all the rezonings and land use activities in the city. Spent 10 years on that board as a member, as chairman, as vice chairman, and we went through the 45-foot height bylaw debate that most people can still remember in the City of Toronto, a very daring and exciting period in Toronto's history. And there seemed to be a natural push all the time to say, why don't you run for city council? And I kept resisting that, and then finally at one occasion, David was pushing along with some other friends, and I finally said, yes, fine, we'll run. And I think it just happened that way. There was almost like a natural progression. Mm-hmm. Added to that was part of I think the service that probably all 3 of us feel to our communities. Mm-hmm. That was also a part of the whole thing.
So you kind of got pushed into it. Did you feel that you were giving
pushed as much as it was encouraged to continue to grow and go beyond each step.
Did you consider the other possible levels of government at the time, or was that something that you didn't even consider?
I think I've always been particularly interested, and my background always leads me in terms of metropolitan service or city service. That's been my experience. There's no question that I've had interest in federal and provincial from time to time, but I've really found a great deal of satisfaction at the municipal level. That seems to be where we're very, very close in a very intimate way to the electorate. So that's very special to me.
Great. David, can you answer the same question? Why did you enter politics, and why did you go for the provincial level?
Well, I think that, again, as Derwin said, for all of us, the notion of public service is elementary. If you don't have that sense of doing it, then I think you go crazy pretty quickly, because it's hard to rationalize all of the sacrifices that you make unless you have a sense of a greater purpose. In my case, and in terms of running provincially, it had a lot to do with the fact that the Ontario Liberals were moving in. It was a positive time for us, and I'm really going back before the 1985 or 87 elections. There are certain policies, certain emphasis that we believe is important, and I believe is important, and David Peterson had a lot to do with that. I had supported him from the time of the leadership back in 81 and 82, and so for me it was a natural progression as well, but in a different sense. Mm-hmm. We had an opportunity to bring about change. That's what I'm interested in seeing happen. Mm-hmm. And so provincial politics was a natural opportunity. I've been involved somewhat municipally, but certainly very active federally as well in the past. and I think that there's a valid involvement there as well. But for me, the opportunity came along at the time of a provincial movement, and that's the reason I got involved.
Do you see yourself as maybe ever changing to one of the other levels, municipal or federal, down the line?
I haven't really thought about it. I'm having a lot of fun now. It's a lot of work, and I'm just pleased if I can continue on doing what I'm doing for any foreseeable future. This career, if that's the right word, can be very short-lived. There's not very much security in politics, and so I don't think you can assume very much about how long it may last.
Thank you, David. Patrick, how about you? What do you think about the idea of careers, of politics as a career, and why federal?
Well, I think if you were talking about careers here, and if you interviewed 100 different people, you would get 100 different stories as to how those individuals came into public life. In my own case, I was 12 years old when I decided that one day I wanted to be a member of the Parliament of Canada. And the background of that, very briefly, is I grew up in a small Ontario town, Bracebridge, where our family owned and published a weekly newspaper, and so I was very much at the center of community activities through that. Secondly, our family was very strongly involved in the church and in church work, and very much on a tradition that saw that we are all our brother's keepers, and you know, a social commitment if you believe your Christian faith strongly, as I did. And the third thing was that by the time I was 10, my father was elected to the Ontario legislature. So I grew up in this milieu where everything involved community issues, politics, public debate, and government. And to me, that was the norm. That was natural. It would have been abnormal not to have been involved, and keenly so, in what goes on in the decisions that are made in the world around us.
So in some ways you followed in your father's footsteps in this
Well, my
particular case.
grandfather had been mayor of the town of Bracebridge in 1924 and a little after. My father had been a provincial member for some 17 years, but I only ever was interested in national politics. To me, it's very important as a Canadian what our country is about and our role in the world. And so that even when I had an opportunity, when my father stepped down to run to replace him, and many people said, well, great thing to do, you know, the Boyer name, and I was 25 years old at the time, and I just felt that I was too young. I wanted to train myself further. I believe that politics is a noble calling. I believe that people who train themselves well in order to serve their constituents and their country can bring something very important into the way our country is, the way it's run, and what we can become. Because, and that's what I would emphasize about a career in politics, that it is a noble calling, that certainly there are always going to be some difficult times and some personality conflicts and clashes and all the rest of it. But this is a country where things don't happen by chance, and it's not the system or the abstract government that makes things happen. It's men and women who have it within their own hands to make a difference, and that's what I'm committed to, and that's why I love the challenge of being in public life.
Well, the next question I'm going to ask is not directed to anybody in particular here. I just would like to know, in general, what are some of the costs and some of the benefits of entering the political arena? How much money does the average politician make? And I imagine it probably varies depending on what level you are and maybe what geographical part of the country you're at. Anybody like to tackle that for first try at it?
Well, in terms of the salary at the city level, the current salary is about $45,000 in the city of Toronto. And that's assuming that you're a member of the Metropolitan Council. There's another $1,000, I think, for that. In the new structure that's been put into place by the provincial government, the Metropolitan Councillors will be paid $57,500, and the members of City Council or local council, but certainly City of Toronto Council, will be paid about $55,000. That's for a full-time job, and there are no other perks beyond that. In terms of the costs, I guess the costs are, one, in terms of time, and two, in terms of family, and three, in terms of personal life.
How much time do you have to put in?
Well, it will vary through the season, but certainly at a minimum, you're talking about 50 hours a week at a minimum. That would be in the off-peak season, although even that's becoming blurred now. There's not much of an off-peak season anymore. And it will depend, for example, as you know, even as we're doing this show, I've been able to come out from City Council. I have to run back to Council. Last week, Metro Council broke at 3:30 in the morning, and meetings began the next morning at 8 o'clock. It's that kind of demand that's inordinate. It's very difficult to explain it. I suppose if you're a parish priest or you're a clergyman of any sort, you get, or a physician, or you're in the helping professions, you learn to understand what those demands are. But they don't end, and they're not just scheduled by the clock. They are. There's a difficult demand in your life, and you really have to be well balanced to maintain that, to maintain a healthy approach to life and a healthy relationship with those around you. So the remuneration is reasonable, but not excessive, and at the municipal level.
Okay. How about the provincial level?
The salary structure is broken up, I guess is the best way to put it. Frankly, I think largely for political purposes. The bottom line is that a backbencher makes approximately $50,000, of which something in the neighborhood of, I think it's 10 or 12,000. I don't remember the exact figure. 10 or 12,000 of that is tax-free. So it really represents a little bit more money in terms of income.
Bit of a bonus.
There is also a series of payments that are made depending upon what position you hold. Another 4,000 approximately if you chair a committee, as I do. If you're a parliamentary assistant, instead of it being 4,000, it's about 9. And if you're a cabinet minister, something in the order of 20 or 25,000. Again, I'm not quite sure of the exact numbers. I would say though, to answer the other part of your question, what the costs are, it's more than a career; it's a lifestyle. I don't think anybody who's in politics gets away from the telephone. Or that they get away from just the onslaught of information that you have to absorb, as well as the demands on you. People will stop you when you walk to the store, when you're in the lineup for a movie, if you ever have time to go to see a movie. You have at least 2 offices to operate if you're an MP or an MPP, and it's physically very taxing. So it's obviously going to be hard on your family life. I think the people who are closest to a member pay the greatest price because they don't see that person. It's very hard on marriages. It's hard on children, and that's the balance. And so
a lot of sacrifices
people have to be aware if they're going to get into politics that's what it will take.
Patrick, what about at the federal level? Are there any changes?
First, the specifics, and Member of Parliament is paid $59,000 plus $18,000 for expenses. Now, I would agree with the points that have been made already that there's a lot more of a cost involved than simply the financial side of it. When I say cost, certainly what I was earning before as a lawyer practicing communications law, and even the royalties from my books, the 5 different books I was writing, all of that represented more money than I earn in public life. On top of that, my wife and I have to maintain a second place of residence in the nation's capital, in Ottawa. So there's costs financially. There are costs in terms of your personal life, certainly, and there are costs in terms of time and so on. So I think it's important to stress that because we're talking about careers. We are talking about something here that is very demanding, and people should not look to serve their country or to be in public life unless they are prepared to make a sacrifice as part of it. But at the same time, there is nothing I could be doing, nothing that I could be doing today that would present the same kind of challenges, the same rewards where you're able to help people or make things happen in Ottawa. I'm chairing the parliamentary committee on the status of disabled persons. And the chance to see something that is one way, know it can be better, and work for that brings a reward that is far greater than the dollars in the wallet at the end of the day could ever be. And I think that very often we live in a comfortable and a consumer-oriented society where people are more and more interested in the material side of life. But when you stand back and look, our basic needs of food, clothing, and shelter are looked after. And beyond that, it comes a point where you have to ultimately answer to yourself, you know.
There's a lot of moral issues involved, a lot of non-quantifiable factors in your decision.
That's right. It's really a commitment that you have to make. But we're talking again careers, and I don't see anybody who's excelling in professional sports or in the arts or letters or on stage or in any line of work where they aren't putting in a tremendous effort because there's a commitment there. And I think that's what underscores the careers of people in public life who are able to make a difference while they're there.
One thing, Peter, that's perhaps not apparent to most members of the public, and I think is a fundamental gap in understanding, is that the vast majority of politicians at all levels, from all political backgrounds, are people who intend to perform well, who act honorably, and we use that phrase in Parliament and the legislature quite loosely, but literally I think that that's true. The vast majority of people are honest, who are trying hard. They may have very strong and conflicting views, and sometimes they act silly and they yell at one another, but the bottom line is that they're all trying to do better and trying to improve the community and the country. And that gets lost, I think, a lot in the public. There's an awful lot of cynicism about politicians. It's always been that way, and it seems, as far as I can determine, to be a little bit more heightened nowadays. But I think the vast majority, that is the case. But the reality is that doesn't get reported, and that doesn't get reinforced very often. That's true.
Right.
And so those cases where it's the other way around tend to be heavily publicized and tends to reinforce a negative view of politicians.
Thank you, gentlemen. We're going to take a short break right now. When we return, we'll be talking about politics again. Now you have a bit of an understanding of why people try to go into politics and what are some of the costs and benefits involved. When we return, we'll be speaking a little bit about how to get there. We're speaking about politics as a career today. I'm now going to try and ask all of our politicians here the question, now that you have decided about getting into politics, and in fact you already are in politics, what did it take to actually get there? How do you gain the confidence of the public so that they actually elect you? And then how do you actually end up convincing them that you're the best person to keep you there? Maybe Derwin, can you start with that?
Peter, I think the best advice is for a person to take a look at a number of politicians and to try to get a sense of who can they relate to in terms of their style, their substance, and particularly substance. And then to make contact with them, find if there are ways to volunteer, if there are ways to work in their office or in their activities, to gain a little more information, a little more experience about the way things work. And then I think you may go the next step, certainly at the municipal level, to talk in terms of appointment to various boards and committees and agencies and commissions. There are a whole range of them that would pick your interest, everything from library boards to exhibition place. There's just a whole range of things. And sort of start moving in through that level of experience. And as you move, I think you begin to make a number of contacts, you begin to meet a number of people in the area around which you live. And I think if you've got a talent for it, if you have a sense for it, and if people perceive that you're honest and you're hardworking and that you're caring and all the kinds of things we really do believe, I think the three of us, that are the normal attributes of the current politician, then I think you'll find that inevitably you start to lead into the appropriate path of election. But I think you have to almost sort of pay your dues, at least at the municipal level. Now, there's a little different process at the other two levels because of the party systems. But at the municipal level, it is one, in fact, that allows everybody freedom to move.
Because there really isn't a party system at the municipal level.
There's not supposed to be.
Okay. Well then, David, in the party system, in the provincial level, is there a difference? If I wanted to get involved in politics at a provincial level, what would you suggest?
Well, there is a little bit of a difference because you do have openly partisan politics, and depending upon the municipality, that's not quite as true at a municipal level. The process, though, of getting involved with a campaign, frequently people get involved with a candidate, even in the time of a nomination, and that's still something I would recommend anybody to do, whether you become active in politics later or not. In order to be elected provincially, you pretty well have to be nominated by one of the parties, and winning the nomination requires, I think in all three parties, I'm not as familiar with the other two, but I think the party process is pretty much the same. You sign people up. They have to become members of the party in each riding, and then show up to vote for you at a nomination meeting. And it's rather like a leadership convention that people will have seen on television. It's closer to that than to a general election. In order to be nominated, generally speaking, people want to see that you are philosophically inclined the same way as the party. They want to see if you are supportive of a particular idea. What do you want to do when you get elected? That kind of a question. And the third thing is they want to be sure that you have the personal qualities that they're going to be comfortable about. Because when people are voting for Patrick Boyer or David Fleet or whoever the local candidate is, most of the time they don't really know all the issues that we may get to make a decision on. And so they're trusting our judgment. And they put a trust in the party and in the leader and in the local candidate in varying degrees.
But how do they trust you? How do they even get to know you? Is it from banging on doors and just speaking with everybody that you possibly can?
Well, that's part of it. That's one way you raise members for nomination. And once you're a nominated candidate, that's one of the ways that you try to meet the public. But there are other ways, involvement in community activities, whether it's a charity, whether it's the nature of your business. Lawyers are frequently involved in politics, so are teachers and professors from university, people who have ideas and also have wide-ranging contacts. So you can meet people in any conceivable way. One of the things that helps in a lot of nomination meetings, at least publicized recently, is involvement with ethnic communities. It's not the only way that it can be done, but it's one technique that's used. It invariably involves a lot of hard work if you're going to get elected. And there's no guarantees in the process either. You can work very hard and not make it for a variety of reasons. So I think you have to take all of that into account. But what people are going to tend to be attracted by is a sense of commitment, a willingness. You have to demonstrate your willingness to work hard, and they've got to be comfortable about trusting you.
Okay. Patrick, how would you answer that question? And would your strategy be different in trying to get nominated compared to trying to get elected once you are nominated?
Well, no, I think it's all part of the same process. You know, in my book, Political Rights, one of the basic freedoms in Canada that I talk about is the freedom to participate in the political process. And we almost take that for granted here, but it is a basic freedom. And I go back to what has been said earlier, that it's just as how you learn to swim is by diving into the water. And in fact, that's how you learn if you like to swim or are capable of swimming, is by being in the water. And so I think it's important for anyone who, watching this program, Peter, starts to sense, well, maybe a political career is something that I want to consider. Then the way to start to test that assumption is to go and get involved. And there are going to be municipal elections in Ontario this November. There won't be a provincial election for several years, but we're going to have a federal election within the year. And I think that anybody who wants to get involved should go and see somebody who's now in office or who's running for office that they believe in and volunteer. This is what you were saying. Right. And sometimes there are people around a candidate or a member of parliament who are kind of guarding the turf. But anybody who himself or herself is the elected representative, they welcome volunteers. And so nobody should be frightened off because on the first time you go forward, you're not received with open arms. Persist, get involved, and step by step, you'll find that there's a process there that you'll find where your strengths are and get involved. And the final thing in all of that is that the individual should keep track of what she believes in or what he believes in, because you'll find other people
while you're on
in
that,
the system
though,
with whom you can make common cause.
While you're on that, though, very quickly, in the political system, in the political party system, can you always say what you believe, though? Or do you have to speak the party line? Well, isn't that a contradiction?
No, it isn't. And some people have said to me, well, Patrick, how can you be supporting the government and yet speak out in criticism of it over the remission orders granted to Goodyear Tire Company? Goodyear closed its plant. In my riding, 1,574 people lost their jobs there. Well, I put my country first, I put my constituents second, and I put my party third in that order. Because at the end of the day, it's my own conscience that I have to account to.
That was a good answer, Peter, but one thing, I thought you nearly had a scoop. I thought that Pat was just about to tell you when the federal election was going to be held. I was sitting here hanging in bated breath to say we're going to have a federal and municipal election at the same time. Keep pressing them.
Probably.
Any scoop? No.
There is one good point, though, in terms of what you represent. One of the things that happens is that your ideas are constantly being tested. If you put out an idea when you're an elected member, the other people are scrutinizing it, whether they think it makes sense or it doesn't. And at the same time, when somebody else makes a suggestion, you go through the same process. And in a way, every vote, every comment you make is one of conscience. Either you choose to apply your judgment carefully to that process or not. I think most members care quite a bit. And at the same time, ultimately, you make a lot of compromises. You don't get to be a dictator. You have to get along with everybody else. But it's generally done in the party system within a certain framework, if that's the right word, a certain general understanding about the trends that you will take and the general approach that you will take. And then you'll have sometimes very heated and interesting debates about which particular policy is the right one. But the general approach is what tends to stream people into one political party or another.
Thank you, David. Gentlemen, I'm afraid our time is up, and thank you all for joining us today. Derwin, Patrick, David.
Thank you.
It's been
Peter.
a pleasure.
Good to be here.
My name is Peter Wolfl. From all of us here at the studio, good luck in your career.